unpacking today's headlines. This is Souls and Liberty in Depth.
Hello, everyone, and welcome to Souls and Liberty, brought to you in partnership with MyPillow.com. Enormous numbers of Protestants and Catholics have something very important wrong. As Trump 2.0 puts the finishing touches on preparation to assume power in about a month, something has changed, which is getting a little, but still not enough attention. It's the wave of Catholics that will be accompanying 47 into the White House. Trump won almost 60% of the Catholic vote, so from a numbers perspective, that in and of itself shouldn't be that surprising. What might be surprising, however, is the type of Catholics heading to D.C. next month. For decades, the dinosaur media has presented Catholics as men and women cast in their mold, the liberal progressive types. Of course, that means Nancy Pelosi, Joe Biden, who are constantly dubbed devout. They're not. Not only are those artifacts of poor catechesis on the way out, literally, Nancy in a Luxembourg, Germany hospital and Joe talking with his movers and packers, but what's coming up behind them is a different breed of Catholics, one who much more closely fit under the label of devout. Devout means believing the teachings. Nancy, Joe, John Kerry, Ted Kennedy, Dick Durbin, Bob Casey, the list is endless. If these ones ever did believe, they certainly don't now. Why did they reject the faith on so many levels? Well, ultimately that's between them and God. But as they exit stage left, the Catholics coming to replace them are an entirely different breed from what most Americans have viewed as Catholic. You know, religion and politics, the many similarities, and often mirror each other, as a matter of fact. Here's a handy little comparison. The same way within the GOP, there have been rhinos who are now being challenged and replaced by the MAGA insurgents. The same phenomenon is happening in Catholicism. Believing, committed Catholics are replacing the 1960s hippy-dippy sexual revolution Catholics who threw the faith overboard to make room for social justice. All hail social justice. Put bluntly, they're dying off, and those types in the world of politics are giving way to actually devout Catholics. And in a separate story, many of them are converts. Think, for example, of J.D. Vance in comparison to Biden or Nancy. It's like they don't even belong to the same religion, and sort of they don't. There's a problem, however. Many theologically low information Catholics have been influenced by the same spiritual muddle that has infected American Protestantism. As the progressive Catholics took control of dioceses and parishes and religious orders in the 1960s and moving forward, they began to adopt a Jesus-light approach to the faith. And, truth be told, they actually had to adopt that approach to rationalize things like premarital sex, contraception, divorce and remarriage, as well as abortion. In truth, enormous numbers of Protestants and their respective 40,000 denominations had already done this a few decades earlier. It was enormous numbers of Protestants who first scuttled millennia of Christian teaching and distorted Scripture to support it. But with laxness in stressing the harder teachings of the Catholic faith, many Catholics sitting in the pews likewise were simply sacrificed to the cowardice of a greedy hierarchy who had no desire to lose their Sunday donations by telling their flocks to resist the evil of the culture. You know, like, say, St. Paul instructed us to do. So by and large, Catholics fell to the same cultural forces that had neutered so many Protestants earlier. The theology of Protestantism is built almost exclusively on and around just the individual. Catholic theology is built on the individual in community, in relationship to each other. The hippy-dippy Catholics had essentially become Protestant in their theology, meaning more individual-centered to the exclusion of the community. If the individuals want to shack up, well, you know what, go ahead. If you want to use contraception, even if you want to have 2, 3, maybe even more wives, well, that might be maybe regrettable, sort of, but hey, stuff happens. God's cool. The misguided spiritual overlay of this was God loves and understands. True. The implication, of course, being go on sinning. Of course, in political and cultural terms, this has been devastating. Contraception has destroyed the family. Shacking up has wiped out marriage. Sex has become a convenience without consequence or commitment, which, of course, gives rise to tens of millions of abortions and the shattered lives that follow in the wake of those abortions. Here's the heart of the problem. Sacred Scripture and the extremely wrong-headed notion that the individual can interpret it for himself. Whatever his emotions tell him when he reads a specific passage, it must be the Holy Spirit. Nope. While this approach has, over the past centuries, largely been thought about in Protestant circles, it has spread like wildfire to Catholic circles as well. What's forgotten in all of this is God and the natural law, the law written on the heart of man by God. Large numbers of Protestants and way too many Catholics simply sidestep the natural law by opening up their Bibles and arrive at whatever conclusion fits their opinion and their lifestyle choice best. Child murder isn't wrong because the Bible says it is. It's wrong because the natural law says it is. And the Bible and the Catholic Church just repeat that truth. They didn't invent it. Contraception isn't wrong because the Bible condemns it. It's wrong because the natural law says it is. And the Bible and the Catholic Church just repeat that truth. Again, they didn't invent it. Divorce and remarriage isn't wrong because the Bible condemns it, not to mention Christ himself personally. It's wrong because the natural law says it is. And the Bible and the Catholic Church, again, just repeat that truth. They didn't invent it. These are God's commands, not man's. Rejecting the Catholic Church, simply repeating these commands like the hippy-dippy, now very old Catholic politicians have done, well, that's just shooting the messenger. These teachings go straight back to the apostles themselves, collected in a volume called the Didache, Greek for the teaching. The Didache, get this, most Catholics have never heard of this, most Protestants have never heard of this. It's a collection of the apostles' teaching in the Didache, and it was written almost 400 years before the canon of sacred scripture was announced in the 5th century. 400 years before almost a single book or letter of the New Testament was ever written down. The new Catholics coming to D.C., the natural law Catholics, see the world through this prism, not the "'cause my Bible tells me so" prism. Good philosophy, your understanding of how the universe works, leads to good theology. Good theology leads to good morality. Good morality leads to a thriving culture and ultimately salvation. So joining me now to talk about all of this and much more is fellow Souls and Liberty contributor Stephen Wynn. Before, Stephen, we get to you, I just want to put this picture up for the audience. This article is entitled, "The Catholics in Trump's Administration Could Take the GOP in a Whole New Direction." This is from Politico. And then the subtitle, "The President Has Nominated at Least a Dozen Catholics to Top Positions." All right, Stephen, this, I recommend, this is a really good article. I mean, they've written it for their own reason, to kind of say, hey, watch out for these crazy Catholics, these natural law, crazy conservative Catholics. But, broken clock's right twice a day. It's a good article. I'd encourage everybody to go read it. You read it. We talked about all of this. Share some of your thoughts with it.
Yeah, it's very, very interesting. Yeah, I recommend that our viewers go check it out. It really describes a philosophical shift that I think we're going to be seeing when Trump takes power. As you said, he's nominated more than a dozen Catholics to key positions of power in his new administration. And they're pursuing they're being guided really by what's being called a common good conservatism, one that is less overtly focused on business, the pro-business model that the GOP has been famous for decades, and one that's much more pro-family. You talked about in your intro, the individual, as part of community, the greater community. That's really kind of what's guiding them philosophically moving forward, and it's very attractive to Catholics and non-Catholics alike. Trump described the GOP recently as the party of common sense, that's very attractive, and I think we're going to be seeing that translate into policy in the coming months here.
One of the things that's interesting to build on that and get your reaction to it, when J.D. Vance, practicing Catholic, he's a convert, like so many of kind of the intelligentsia, actually, of the new actual conservative political movement. J.D. Vance is a convert to Catholicism. We keep seeing them, either come in or come like right up to the margin and right to the periphery of the Catholic faith. When J.D. Vance and Elon Musk, who's essentially an agnostic, both arrive at the conclusion that the decreasing birth rate, which is largely due to both abortion and contraception, is a threat. And to use Joe Biden's expression, an existential threat. This one actually is an existential threat. That's really saying something, that that Elon Musk and J.D. Vance are in agreement on this, that Americans need to have more babies.
Yeah, absolutely. And again, it's just common sense. And that's why it appeals to both, a conservative Catholic and a veritable agnostic. When you're not, in Musk's case, he's not guided overwhelmingly. He's not bound basically by commitment, some ridiculous commitment to leftist ideology. He's really guided by common sense, and in theological terms, that's operating out of natural virtue, basically. And he's a man of goodwill, and so he's seeing that this is a threat to the future of the United States, to the future of every country in the world, that where populations are imploding and demographic collapse is beginning. So. Yeah, it's very, very interesting what's happening right now. For decades, Democrats have looked to the state as the great guarantor of the public good, while Republicans, by and large, have in many ways looked to the free market as such. And that is now beginning to change. For more and more Americans, there's this growing realization that neither the state nor the market will save us. Left unchecked, both systems will destroy us, because both systems are products of man, a fallen man who, despite our technological progress, remains just as corrupt today as we were on the day we chose Satan over God in the Garden of Eden. And the failures stemming from government largesse, from an uncontrolled state, those have been obvious for generations. What's fascinating is the much more recent awakening. I would say it's still largely in its infancy, by many on the right, that the market is not the ultimate guarantor of the public good, because at its heart, again, is fallen man. Man, if left unchecked by the interior grace of God, degrades any system he designs. For instance, the free market, ultimately it's reduced to a tool of crony capitalism, which ultimately destroys itself and the nation that operates by it. That's what we see going on today. The same degradation, it's occurring. It transforms medicine into big pharma, which sacrifices public health on the altar of profit. It transforms national defense into the military-industrial complex, which sacrifices young American lives on the altar of profit. It erases borders to allow millions of immigrants, illegal immigrants, into this country for the purpose of cheap labor, which again, all in the name of profit. And this degrading of our systems, it's been going on for decades. Obviously, that's why we are where we are today. Many of those who Trump, is instilling as part of his team, they get this. Many are Catholic, some are not, but they still recognize this new vision as a way forward. I say new vision. It's perhaps new to the U.S. political scene. It's very old, for those of us who are familiar with Catholic teaching in this area. It's really, really fascinating, and it's going to, I think, help stimulate a new awareness of what constitutes the public good and how to design policies that promote it.
Yeah, it's interesting when you think about how the government, like what is the role of government? What does it do? Well, obviously, it's is to protect God-given rights. But right there in the preamble is promote the general welfare. I mean, that doesn't mean just building roads and getting out of the way. Does it? Does it not? I mean, I think, as you rightly pointed out, the kind of Reagan Republican version of the government was, as about as libertarian as you could be. Government should be as far away from people as possible. There's a certain truth in that, depending on what, you have to dig down deeper. That headline doesn't tell you enough on its own. But on the other side, as you said, you had the, kind of the deep state Democrats joined by rhino Republicans who are just, government is, we have to make laws and rules for everything. I mean, there's a vote coming up this week on a 1,500-page Omnibus Spending Bill that, as we're recording this, just got delivered to the members of Congress today. 1,500 pages of legalese crap. Spend this, do that. Really? Who in the hell is going to sit down? What member of Congress is going to sit down and read that whole thing? But that you would even approach the governing method by, let's have all these little secret backers, we're the government and we understand things better. Okay, here, produce this 5 million word document. Okay, everybody vote on this in 24 hours. There's this understanding. There's a philosophy there. Philosophy matters. And the philosophy on the part of the left is that government should be involved in everything and solve everything. That's not a Catholic position. That's not a Christian position. On the other hand, this idea that government really shouldn't be involved in anything except sort of letting the free market kind of do its own thing and all of that. Well, it says right in our founding document, promote the general welfare. This is kind of a sea change. And the fact that it's being led not by old liberal hippy-dippy, as I like to call them, Catholics, the Nancy Pelosi's of the world, who will break the natural law to hold on to power, killing babies as just one example. But when you look at this new thing like, J.D. Vance coming in and saying, hey, the government has a role in supporting families, in creating a culture that's pro-family. So there's no way you would have heard 15, 20, 30 years ago from Republicans, let's give a child tax credit. They might have supported it, during a campaign season because, who wants to vote against children, except Democrats. But the idea that you are promoting the general welfare and understanding that if society is moral and whole and families, see, not an individual, like I talked about in the opening. It's not about an individual. It's about a community. If you can use government to steer and provide an atmosphere, an environment where these little communities can thrive. I mean, in Catholic theology, we talk about this as, the domestic church, that it happens in the family. Think how many families have been screwed up and messed up across the board. For the past 50 years. A new wave of believing devout Catholics coming in and saying, nope, there's some good over there on the left, not much, but there's something there. And over here on the right, there's more good, but there's also a lot of bad. Let's throw out all the bad and create this new sort of middle way, third way. Well, as you rightly say, Stephen, this is nothing new to, Catholics, certainly from, Europe and, 600, 800,000 years ago. But over here, it's like revolutionary. What are your thoughts on all this?
Yeah, I agree. I think it certainly is revolutionary. It will be for the United States when we begin to implement policies like that. I think it's really interesting that there's a great opportunity to evangelize really through the application of policy. Yeah, I'm sure, Politico did not intend this article to be, it didn't, design this article to evangelize or catechize in any way, but it may. I think it has the potential to do that, for people who are not Catholic, who may have a misunderstanding or little to no knowledge of the teachings of the church in general. reading, from their eyes, I would think a number of them it would spark interest in what the church teaches, and so it can draw people, it can awaken people to the teachings of the church, which are sound. They're basically, a reflection of natural law, as you said in your intro. And that can go a long way toward bringing more people into the fold. I think at the same time, I'm very optimistic. I want to preface my next comment saying I'm very optimistic about this. It's very, very cool. But I think we, as Catholics, as Christians in general, committed Christians, we need to recognize that every system is corruptible because, at the heart of every system is, corrupt men and women, basically. Sure. And this is why a re-Christianization of the United States is so fundamentally important for us moving forward. The work that Trump and his team are going to be doing, that's going to go a long, long way toward correcting the course of the nation. But in my opinion, we won't truly be able to anchor in the proverbial safe harbor until many, many more Americans are guided interiorly by God, by the grace of God.
And look, and when we're at Mass, when we Catholics who believe the faith are at Mass and we pray for the country, this is one of the things we're praying for. Look, yep. I want to read almost near the end of it. It's a pretty lengthy article as far as Politico articles go. But it's pretty comprehensive too. But there's 2 or 3 paragraphs from the end. I want to everything we've talked about. It's kind of sums up to that point. But 2 or 3 paragraphs for the end, it says this. I'd like to get your thought on it. Still, progressive Catholics are skeptical about the extent to which the GOP will actually prioritize these policies. That's what we've been talking about, these policies. When Trump has promised in his first 100 days to focus on extending tax cuts, taking action on the border, and addressing crime in cities. It's unlikely big business, long allied with the Republican Party, will roll over easily. That's a great summary of exactly the challenge here. Government is for the general welfare, which of course pertains to families. Government has certain powers that it can use, which the left has abused to destroy the family. Let's take the better from each, make this thing, and then look, some people, big business, you're going to have, is it really that big of a deal if you have, you only make $4 billion this year as opposed to $4.2 billion? I get it. I understand. It came out of the economic world. I get it. You got to make money and all that and everything. But when it just becomes sort of an arms race to have more profit than you had last year, continually with no end in sight, and the people whose backs you may be making that profit on be damned, that's not a Christian position. That's not a Catholic position.
No, not at all. And that could be a real challenge. I think Wall Street has not been guided by Christian principles in a very long time, if ever.
Really? Why would you say that?
Yeah, right. The rot in New York is every bit as deep as the rot in DC. Yep. And so that Trump is going to face opposition there, I think.
He certainly will.
Yeah, absolutely.
When he invited the was it the AFL-CIO leader, Teamsters, can't remember who it was at the convention. People were kind of shocked. Remember, you and I were actually watching it and talking at the same time, going, "Oh my gosh, this guy's up on the stage at the Republican National Convention, like damning big business for like its greed and not extending, sharing the wealth and all that sort of thing." And you and I were like, "Whoa, are we watching this with our own eyes?" There were a lot of people who came out, a lot of business leaders and things who came out shortly after that, with their hackles all crazy, and they did not like that at all.
Right. Yeah, exactly. So, there are going to be a lot of challenges. I think, again, this speaks to what I was just saying, basically that every system is corruptible, ultimately, if it's not infused with Christ, if it's not led by men and women who are basically converted, who are not operating according to grace, to faith. You mentioned unions. I think unions are very important. They were, erected basically to protect the rights of the common worker. But something, I was amazed, working with you over the past several years, I got sort of an inside look into how at least some of these unions operate, and there's a great deal of overregulation, corruption that are involved, in the operation of unions. You can speak to that, if you wish, but it's. I was just reminded, seeing how the hurdles that we had to jump through when we wanted to film or record in a certain location. Whenever there was a union involved, there were a lot of hoops to jump through that were unnecessary. And these hoops
let's be honest, there were a lot of payoffs that had to happen. It wasn't tens of thousands of dollars or anything like that, but and just so the public who don't really deal with unions, just a little example here. We used to shoot on occasion down at Cobo Hall, which is now the TCF, was the TCF Center. So all the cheating happened in 2020 in Wayne County. Cobo Hall, renamed TCF, and now it's Huntington Place. We'd go in there and shoot things, and the moment you set foot on that property, it's unionized. So you had to, if you wanted to, for example, hey, we're a TV crew, we have lights, we plug in the lights. In this union hall, the union members have to plug in the lights for you. I'm not kidding. Like at home, plug it in your lamp. That's all we were doing. You have to plug in the light for you. In order to have that happen, you had to go all the way down to the other end of Cobo Hall, where kind of like the little administrative offices were with the union members. And you had to get in line, fill out a form, hand in the form, and sit there and wait for a shop steward to come out and say, what is it you need? And then they would radio one of the workers out on the floor, and that worker out on the floor might respond in a timely fashion, might not. So eventually you'd schedule it. You'd get charged for it. It was usually a couple $100. I'm not kidding. A couple $100 to have a guy plug in a light for you going through this whole process. So, what we used to have to wind up doing was just going to one of the union workers and slipping him a 20 and just saying, would you plug this in for us? Because you don't have time to sit there for hours waiting. I mean, we're on the clock too. So people paying us are also on the clock. So yeah, that, as you said, every system is corruptible. No matter what innocence or good intentions or anything it begins in, it doesn't take long for that to become corrupted and now abused. It's one of the reasons the church is so magnificent, that despite all the corruption, and boy, there's a lot of corruption, God corrects the church. One way or the other, God corrects the church because it belongs to him. Unions don't belong to God. Cobo Hall doesn't belong to God. Political parties don't belong to God. But the church does. So God protects the church from that kind of corruption. I mean the Catholic Church. So when we are talking about all these things that happen in the day-to-day world and the general welfare, and unions are good until they're not, management is good until it's not, they're competing interests. And because there's nobody really to step forward and enunciate the interests of the family, it gets buried under all these competing interests. Coming to Washington right now in about a month are a whole horde of believing Catholics who are saying, we're going to do our best to bring an end to that. We're going to be the voice of the family. That's pretty cool.
Yeah, it's very cool. Very cool. Very encouraging. I want to just say that I am pro-union. I think that's a very necessary, those are very necessary institutions. Why? Because, under laissez-faire economics, you have people like John Rockefeller who just run roughshod over the individual, grinding them into dust for the sake of profit. Again, because man has fallen. We're interiorly corrupt unless we're guided by, the teachings of the faith. And so, again, I think that speaks to, I think Trump's plan and his team are going to do great things. But it really, what they're envisioning, I think it's going to do a great deal of good, but to really drive it home, to make America the greatest that she can be, again, we have to, those of us at Souls and Liberty, those of our, those who are watching us, every Catholic and evangelical in the pew, we have to get busy, on whatever level we're at really re-evangelizing the United States, re-Christianizing the country, because take the issue of the family, for example. I really like what I'm hearing, out of Trump and his team. We need a much stronger focus on the family. But ultimately, I have to say, I think, no amount of tax incentives, expanded maternity leave, any of that, I think those are inadequate to really solve the crisis that we see in that sector of our society. Other nations in Europe have been trying this for several years. Hungary, Russia, Greece. They've ramped up benefits for families. They've tried to incentivize the formation of new families. That's had some effect, but not enough. Every single one of those nations are still well below replacement level fertility, 2.1. They're all within the 1 point something range. That's where America is right now as well. And so, policy can only do so much to really combat the contraceptive mindset, which has corrupted, practically every citizen of this country. It's really going to take a conversion, a mass conversion in the United States to get us where we need to be. These policies will go a long way toward helping, but to really root our recovery, to make it permanent, we have to, I don't know, work at an individual level, at a community level, toward greater fidelity to Christ and his teachings. And I think that will really transform America into what we need to be.
Yeah, that's a very good point. It has to be a combination of the heart and the head, but the heart has to be there first. There has to be some outreach. You're talking to a country of roughly 330 million, not quite evenly divided in age groups between all the various generations, but you've got this older generation, the baby boomers, of which I'm on the very tail end of that. That group would have to be convinced that they believed and promoted and lived a lie, the sexual revolution, that was their baby, and it has destroyed the family in America. I think that's going to be a hard sell. I don't think you shouldn't not try it. Of course you should try it, but I think moving the needle in that category would be extremely difficult. Once somebody, comes to some intellectual proposition, and they embrace it and they bring it into themselves, boy, if that proposition is wrong or evil or whatever, but they've embraced it and they've sort of cloaked it in my truth, that's a really, really hard thing to break, just psychologically. I think probably have much more success. And again, I'm not saying don't do it. You have to do it, but you're going to get huge blowback from there because they have to look in the mirror and admit, holy crap, my whole life has been a lie. Okay, well, that's a tough sell. You go down to younger generations, however, and they're living the effect of the older generation having embraced this lie about the sexual revolution. Yes. And the older generation kind of managed to skate, without having to pay the consequences for it. Certainly not like the younger generations have. So it was interesting when you look in that sort of middle range. I don't know what the X's and the Z's, I don't know what they all are, but that like 45-year-old group was a dominant number for Trump. And I don't think it's just because eggs, and gas needed to come down a few pennies. I think they sense a something. And you look at J.D. Vance. He's, he'll be 40 or 39 when he takes office, and he turns 40 in February or March or something. But anyway, look at that age group. And you look at all the converts that are influential converts to the faith. None of them are really in that sort of boomer crowd. They're in the younger groups. And they're the ones who are going to be saying, the boomer Catholics, I mean, that's Nancy Pelosi, that's Joe Biden, that's John Kerry, that's, God rest his soul, Ted Kennedy. It's that whole crowd. These younger ones are they're looking around and going, WTF? WTF?
Yes, exactly.
Why can't I buy a house? What's this? How come I can't? There's like no girls to date. Blah 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 blah. They're mulling this over in their head. Well, you can step into that group and you can start to provide answers to them.
Yes, 100%. That what you said is an absolute bullseye. You're the tail end of the baby boomers. I'm at the tail end of Gen X, and so I came of age in the 1990s when the quote unquote fruits of the sexual revolution were really beginning to materialize. We had an explosion of STIs, sexually transmitted infections. Abortion was rampant because of unplanned pregnancies. A number of very, very fatal societal ills had set in. But I tell you what, 30 years later, what we faced in the 90s was nothing compared to what the millennials and especially Gen Z, have been facing. You mentioned, can't find a girlfriend. There is such a crisis of identity among today's younger people.
Yep.
So many of them don't even know what manhood and womanhood are, and it's just
in their defense, how would they? Why would
absolutely.
Why would they know that? I don't remember the lady's name.
Right. Yeah, this is not a slam against them. It's no. I just my heart goes out to them because
Absolutely.
They've been raised in the culture that has been increasingly degrading, and so many of them are so lost because our culture has been so lost. But with that said, and that's why you see blue-haired Marxists running around campus. At the same time, there are many of them who are searching desperately for truth. And therein lies our opportunity as Catholics, as Christians, as conservatives. I think that is where, the turnaround of America is not going to start overnight. It's not going to happen overnight by any means. Trump is going to get to work immediately as soon as he takes office. But it's going to be quite some time before even his government policies begin to take shape, to really have an effect. It's going to take even longer for American hearts to be turned around, but our opportunity lies with the younger people in this country. They have really borne the full fruits, the poisonous fruits of the sexual revolution. That's why that undergirds so many of the ills that they're having to grapple with. And if it's up to people like us to really make that connection and to make the connection that, if you design and implement government policy that reflects the natural law, you can have a flourishing country, from top,
as we used to have. I'm going to take a commercial break real quickly here, Stephen. When we come back, I want to talk about education. I want to talk about income tax. But just before I leave here, if we can ask you to take a little break here and just say, look, if you like what you hear here, you think these discussions are beneficial, are they provoking? Are they thought-provoking for you? Are they things you'd like to share, the information, share with other people? We look at the culture, we look at politics, we look at all of it through a very, very excellent prism of Catholic social teaching, of natural law, of natural moral law. That's what we do here at Souls and Liberty. Souls obviously is the immaterial part, liberty is the material part. How your philosophical and theological worldview shapes what you do as a society, as a culture, as a nation. So if you like what you're hearing here, you'd like to support us, please click on the donation link. It's right there on the page you're watching us on. And we're going to step away for just a moment and come right back. Thank you.
I'm excited to announce our Christmas extravaganza is finally here. Get this season's flannel sheets for as low as $59.98. They won't last long, so get them while you can. Our famous My Slippers, they haven't been on sale for over a year. Regularly $119.98, now only $59.98. Our 6-piece towel sets are back in stock with extremely limited quantities, only $29.98. With hundreds of MyPillow products, there's something for everyone on your Christmas list. Bathrobes, duvets, quilts, down comforters, and so much more. So go to MyPillow.com or call the number on your screen. Use your promo code to save on all MyPillow products. For example, flannel sheets for as low as $59.98, or our 6-piece towel sets, just $29.98. But that's not all. I'm extending our 60-day money-back guarantee until March 1st of 2025. Plus, all orders over $75 or more ship absolutely free.
All right, Stephen, coming back, I think one of the things that you hear from younger people all the time is they're buried under and it's true. I mean, I don't think they're making it up. They're buried under all sorts of, debt, college debt, the whole bit and everything else. There's an income tax question there. When Trump tweeted out, let's get rid of the IRS and get rid of the federal income tax, people went crazy. Most people were quite ecstatic about that proposition. But of course, you have the blue-haired economists who are protected from the consequences and the fallout of their monetary policies because they live in these ivory towers in academia. And that all trickles down through education from the colleges to the high schools, largely through public schools, but certainly not exclusively. Monetary policy, it's hard to talk about natural law when you're taking a quarter of people's money on just the federal level.
Right. It's
there's no virtue in that. It's you're taking people's money. I mean, income taxes is not some, objective moral truth. Why should people sacrifice, the fruit of their labor and then hand it over to a government in DC, which then distributes that? Do you know what? We have paid $2 trillion in the last 4 years for NATO. $2 trillion in the last 4 years for NATO. Where's that money come from? You, me, everybody else. And yet people over here can't get out from under Hurricane Helene. They can't, afford to put a down payment on a house. They can't save money to put a down payment on a house. They couldn't afford the house if they had this down payment saved anyway. I mean, this is obscene. Promote the general welfare. Your first place you have to promote the general welfare is with American citizens, with people of your nation, not all around the world.
Yes, right, exactly. Yeah, Europeans and some in this country, they're always very smug to point at our healthcare system as ultimately just utterly corrupt, and in many ways it is. But it's funny how they forget that their safety, they're able to have their free healthcare systems because we, American taxpayers, pay for our military, and which basically overshadows, we're the bulwark against Russian expansion into Europe, and so it's just interesting how people don't connect those dots here. I think
largely because they don't want to. I mean, it's nice to just stay on the surface and glide across like a rock skipping across the water. You don't have to get deep because you're enjoying the benefit of it. So why would you go deep?
Right. Yeah, true. But yeah, the tax burden, it impacts, the middle class, especially hard. And, many of those, especially among the younger generations who are suffering right now, are members of the middle class. They want to be upwardly mobile. They want to grasp the American dream, a home, a family, all of that. And it's just for a great many of them, those are just unattainable goals. And again, it's because of bad policy that's not guided, that's enacted, not in keeping with the natural law, basically. And as a result, our country is foundering at this point. And so, to realign policy with philosophy, to speak in grand terms, that will help a great deal. I think it's going to be very important to communicate to the younger generations that alignment. Basically, that bad policy. That's why they are suffering. That's why they're renting. Paying exorbitant rental prices. Why they're unable to afford a home, a family, and so forth. We have to really, and thankfully, we have X as a platform through which we can communicate these ideas, these realities. And that's something we've really got to be focusing on as we move forward.
Yeah, I think one of the things that I've always said, as I say this back in Detroit all the time too, there are two major institutions that the left, the Marxists, the communists set out to get control of. And when they got control of those, these two, all of the rest kind of fell in line. One was the media, and check, and the other was education. And when you talk about education, when you talk about reaching them and explaining that this is bad policy, and how's that going to happen? I mean, yes, you can have, and you should have a social media team there putting stuff out like, hey, if you're between 20 and 50 and you're trying to buy a house or you want to get married, have children or something, you've been screwed over by this philosophical view of the world, which each side has a foot in supporting. They disagree on other things, but that you have to pay for their, glory. They both agree with that, and you're being crushed because of it. How do you get to that in a more deep level? You get to it through education. The idea that the U.S. Department of Education, I mean, when Jimmy Carter instituted that in 1977, I think it was, 77, 78, when Jimmy Carter instituted that, we were number one in the world in all of the stuff that you get from education. Now we're down to, depending on how you measure it, somewhere between 14 and 20. I mean, it's failed miserably. Again, if you note that the left never wants to take the people who are most harmed by their education policies and give them a choice to get out, to opt out of decaying public schools, largely urban schools, but certainly not restricted to that. Why shouldn't you be able to take your child and homeschool your child, go to a charter school, go to a private school, go to a Catholic school? Why do your tax dollars have to support a system that's failing? I mean, I think that's one of the deals. And why should it have federal oversight? Maybe federal oversight for the distribution of the money, which I suppose would be a pretty small staff sitting in some office in D.C., which, by the way, doesn't have to be in D.C. Why wouldn't you take that money and redistribute it again with this model in mind, the general welfare? The general welfare is not being served in the area of education. As a matter of fact, it's being underserved or deserved, or it's being flipped on its head. The fact that most kids graduating from public school all over the country can't identify like the most basic things on earth, like the United States on a map, for example, world map. You do have to get to them, but you got to get to them over a long term. As you said, isn't going to happen overnight. Even the corruption in all of these institutions, law, courts, politics, education, media, medicine, religion, all of this corruption happened over the course of 50 or 60 years. Now, this is not going to turn back in 5 months, one presidential term, half a presidential term, but somewhere you have to begin to lay the groundwork, and you've got to be able to convince people. And I think the classroom is a pretty darn good place to start convincing people, in addition to the media.
Yeah, 100%. 100. I can't tell you the number of people that I grew up with and that I've seen, as an adult, seeing kids growing up who were from truly God-fearing Christian homes, both Catholic and Protestant. They were, quote unquote, raised right. They went to mass, they went to church every Sunday. They were, taught the catechism and whatnot. But because that all of that teaching was undermined 8 hours a day within the classroom, and then hours later, through the media, not necessarily the news, but what they were seeing coming out of Hollywood. In so many cases, the world won out, basically. Yeah. Too many parents, they at least, when I was growing up, they would send their kids to public schools, not realizing that there really was a war of worldviews going on. And
that's the same. That same label applies to Catholic schools too. I mean, I don't think your parents and my parents sent us to school thinking that we were hearing the weird crap we heard. And holy crap, when I was at Notre Dame, what? I mean, I used to argue with the professors. One professor I was sitting in class with, it was Saints and Scholars, I think it was. It was like a 1-credit class. He said Saint Bernadette Subaru was insane. He came out and said that. And I was like, what? And there were probably 30 students, maybe 25 students in the class. And I remember this specifically because there were 2 twins who were in my class and lived around the corner from me in my dorm. And they got up and walked out and told him, he's a heretic or whatever, something like that. I went up to him after. I protested loudly in class, and I went up to him afterwards and said, "You're saying Saint Bernadette Subaru, out of Vision of the Blessed Virgin Mary in Lourdes, was insane?" He said, "Oh yes." He said on that very kind of smug, condescending, I know better than you little twerp. And I said, "You do know, doctor, you do know that there's a grotto about 500 yards away from here, replicating that scene in Lourdes, France, with a statue of Saint Bernadette Subaru there kneeling, looking at the Blessed Virgin Mary in the niche. You know that, don't you?" And he said, "Well, you have to do these sorts of things to," I don't know, he came up with some cultural expression he said, but it wasn't, his upshot was, well, that's not true. It's just there to raise money with donors. I was floored. And I can't remember. I don't have a memory one way or the other whether I told my parents about that. Maybe not. I don't know. But the idea that you could go to Notre Dame, the University of Notre Dame, that was my sophomore year. That was 1980-81 class year. And really, you can go and you can have a professor tell you that a saint who's, duplicated in statuary form at the heart of campus was insane. Education needs to be really grabbed by the throat and fixed. However you fix it, okay, that's a debate. But, you got to get going on it. You got to get moving on it. There's a pretty narrow window here to be able to start to show some positive benefits to all of this.
Yes, exactly. I think one of the something that's been fascinating to watch is the growth of homeschooling in this country. It has increased massively since the lockdown, since COVID erupted, and not just among conservative Christians, but even agnostics. A lot of them are now schooling their kids at home. I think that's very, very encouraging. In fact, in the state of Missouri, there are now more kids being homeschooled than are being educated in the public school systems in Kansas City and St. Louis, the two largest cities combined. And that is a very new development. And I think, wherever parents can do that, I think that's very, very important because, again, your kids are in they're being educated 8 hours a day. What sort of information is filling their heads? It's not just, arithmetic, English, whatnot. It's underpinning all teaching is a particular philosophical bent. Sure. And in every public school system in this country, and many parochial schools, as you say, that philosophy is decidedly anti-Christian. And so, you don't want your kid to turn out a Marxist. If you can, teach them at home or find a good Catholic school or evangelical school to send them to. That is key. And meanwhile, while that's going on, yes, we have to be revolutionizing things at the federal level with the Department of Education. I think there, as you said, in education and then in the media, DC and Hollywood, I think those are going to be the two biggest nuts to crack because they have been infiltrated for the longest among any American institution. And they, in many ways, are the most committed to the leftist worldview.
Absolutely. I mean, you think about what happened on all the anti-Semitic crap that happened at Harvard and Yale and Princeton and all that stuff back during the launch of the Gaza war and all of that and everything. And it's like, whoa, hold on a second. Is it really this prominent on college campuses, really, that you can get the university presidents of the supposedly most prestigious universities in the world sitting there in a congressional panel refusing to condemn, like saying, hey, Jew, we're going to kill you. Really? That's how you're going to... Like, how far gone are your universities? How the board of directors that, appoint the president or however their internal structure works? There's a whole mindset there in education. It's been corrupted. It goes back to, John Dewey. I mean, all this stuff, but also Karl Marx. I mean, there's this whole thing of, go back to, Antonio Gramsci, over 100 years ago, wrote, as part of, as the founder of the Italian Communist Party, you have to undermine all of these institutions. He didn't use the term infiltrate and take the long march, but that's what he meant. That's what he said. That phrase was later attributed to him by a German student during the German riots, school riots of the 1960s. But anyway, it doesn't matter who said it and when. It was Rudy Detsch who said it. But anyway, that term, that idea of going to, and understanding this is going to take 100 years to do. Well, here we are 100 years later. And the spiritual madness that's being fed, to students now, and on all levels of education. There's a fellow, we've interviewed him before, the superintendent of of Oklahoma's Department of Education. Tremendous guy. Interviewed him. I could have asked that interview to go on for another 40 years. It was fantastic listening to him. He's the guy that he got all kinds of attention when he said, well, you're going to have the Bible in the classroom. And all of a sudden, like, of course, the left's minds blew up and the media and the social media. And at the end of the time, it was, stuff made absolute perfect sense, made common sense. Well, he had this little rebellion within the Rhino class of the very Republican state legislature in Oklahoma who wanted to dump him. Why would you want to dump him? Voters need to vote those rhinos out. This is the kind of guy you want. You want to affect change. You want to do pro-family. That's the kind of guy you want to support. That's where some tax dollars should be flooded to his area. Federal tax dollars, however that's going to work with the Department of Education doing its thing. I mean, the Department of Education doesn't just vanish the day that Trump takes the oath in a month. But how are you going to do all this? How's all of this going to be done? But you need the vision. What's the vision that you have? What's the benchmark? And how are you going to it? What's your North Star? You have that, all the rest of the stuff starts to fall into place. Anyway, little things rubbing up against each other here or there. But as long as you have the vision, you understand the mission, you know what the North Star is that you're being guided by, but you got to get to work like this. You got to get to work. Stephen, I've blabbed on for some of your time. You got a final minute. Closing thoughts.
Okay. Yeah, no problem. Yeah, basically, you have to be fearless, like that gentleman, like the folks who are coming into D.C. now. You have to be, of course, you're going to hear an outcry from the press, from those on the left.
Who cares?
And even
Who
from,
cares?
Yeah, exactly. You can't listen to that. You have to just push forward unbowed because the rot is so endemic. It is so destructive that nothing less than a full assault, a full turning back of all of that will suffice in order to save the nation. And so good for Trump, good for his folks. And again, while they're doing that in D.C. at the federal level, each one of us, every single committed Catholic, committed evangelical, we have to be doing our part at the individual and community level within our families, basically working to educate others, educate ourselves, and basically ultimately diving deeper, coming closer to God so that we can re-Christianize America. Because again, I think that ultimately will be the only thing that can guarantee the full success of what's being envisioned in Washington right now.
Yeah, absolutely. And I think like the stonemasons and the architects and the builders of those cathedrals in Europe have to understand, when they dug the ground out and they laid the foundation for all of those cathedrals, they knew they wouldn't be alive to see the steeples go up. But this is building something like the founders. Our founders. It's how it was. When did the apostles really understand exactly how they were doing this? No, but it was their mission, it was their vision, it was their North Star, Jesus Christ, that he commissioned them to do this, and that's what they had to do, and that's what they set about to do, and here we are 2,000 years later. Amen.
Amen.
All right, Stephen, thanks very much. Appreciate you being on as always and sharing your insights with us. Before we leave today, just an appeal again that if you like what you see here and how we do things here at Souls and Liberty, please consider a donation to keep us up and running. Just click on that provided link. The patriotic movement, MAGA, needs to be firmly grounded in correct theology and philosophy from which the entire notion of patriotism flows, or it too will be subverted by the enemy. That is what we present each day here on Souls and Liberty. Thanks for joining us. Coming to you from Houston, Texas. Yeehaw! Gary Michael Voris. God love you.